The day I returned home, George left his bedridden wife Emily to pick me up. At the airport, his gaze was intense, his eyes seemingly filled with deep emotion. His son, Elias, looked up at me with his chubby face, full of admiration. "Auntie, you're so pretty. Can you be my mommy?" Behind them, Emily stood with a pale face, looking confused and about to collapse. I bent down with a forced smile. "But, kiddo, I like your mom. How about I become your dad instead?" Chapter 1. I had a nightmare. After arriving at the psychologist's office, the assistant pouring me water looked at me with concern. "That dream again?" Suppressing my emotions, I replied with a blank expression. "I really can't take it anymore." The assistant sighed sympathetically. "Having dreams like that every day. No wonder you're falling apart right after taking your meds." I gripped the teacup tightly in my hand, lowered my eyes, and muttered absent-mindedly, "One day, I'll kill them all." The assistant was startled and quickly tried to calm me. "Stay calm." The clock on the wall ticked for a long while until it chimed on the hour. Finally, I snapped out of it and apologized to the panicked assistant. "I suffer from an extremely aggressive mental illness, the kind that's incurable. In the past, even when I had episodes, I rarely thought about killing anyone. But lately, my condition has worsened, and I've started having such thoughts, all because of a disgusting recurring dream. In this dream, the same story plays out over and over, always ending the same way. A man, who is in love with someone else, marries a woman he doesn't love and has a son with her. The woman is weak in nature, and her social status is far lower than the man's. Both the man and the son treat her with cold indifference. Later, the man's first love returns from abroad, and the man rekindles his feelings for her. His son, observing this, grows closer to the first love as well. Despairing, the already bedridden wife gives up on treatment and commits suicide. At that moment, the man and his son suddenly realize they truly loved the woman all along. They can't bear the pain of losing her. So, the man, a selfish scoundrel, shifts all his pain onto the first love. The first love's life is ruined, and before her death, she suffers endless torment. My dream keeps repeating this story, and the first love's face happens to look exactly like mine. The character is also similar to me, a wealthy girl who had gone abroad. But I went abroad to seek treatment. Back when I was a student, I was diagnosed with a rare, severe mental illness. The doctors didn't fully understand it. They described me as having a combination of bipolar disorder, manic depression, and schizophrenia. Sometimes I wanted to lose control and kill anyone who annoyed me. Sometimes, I wanted to push everyone into madness. And other times, I just wanted to sit back and watch the world fall apart. Because the social circle was small, my parents feared I'd cause trouble domestically. On top of that, I was tired of pretending to be friendly with people I disliked. So, I crossed the globe to a place where no one knew me. For a while, my condition had stabilized, but then I started having these dreams. I'm sure the first love in the dream is supposed to be me, but I can't understand how I'd end up rekindling a romance with a married man. Firstly, I'm not interested in married men. I have no desire for other people's possessions. Secondly, I despise all men. Actually, that's not entirely accurate. I despise almost all of humanity. Lastly, regarding those people from back home, I have no unresolved feelings with any of them. Who could possibly be my first love? Could it be that gangster I almost disfigured? Or the monk I mocked until he broke down? Or perhaps the prince who threw up all over my car after insisting on riding with me? I can't figure it out. The faces of those three people remain blurred, as if shrouded in a heavy mosaic. Otherwise, I'd have already returned home and done something illegal at the height of my illness. Chapter 2. Actually, there are still a few people back home I get along with. Take Melissa, the eldest daughter of the Move family. For example, she's completely different from me. No matter the situation, she's always mentally stable, always smiling, though a bit slow to react. For instance, I told her a week ago that I was coming back. A week later, she called me, as if something had just occurred to her. I was in the middle of smashing mass-produced mosaic figurines from the factory, and amidst the clattering noise, Melissa, completely unfazed, spoke in her usual soft and calm voice. I just remembered something. Margarita, it seems everyone already knows you're coming back. I had been investigating the family of 3 in my dreams for a while, but being abroad, I wasn't exactly well informed. Whenever I asked my parents about it, they always dodged the question. Later that night, I found a bunch of strange search records on my account. Details of XXX family massacre, legal consequences for killing an entire family, understanding the mind of a family massacre perpetrator, what to do if your daughter wants to kill people. Me, seeing their deep concern and knowing it wasn't entirely unfounded, I had no way to refute it. Since I couldn't get anything out of my parents, I turned to my friends in the circle. Finally, today, sloth like Melissa had some information. George. He said he'll pick you up at the airport. She slowly informed me. He has a son, really likes you. George? I squinted, somewhat surprised. I'd nearly forgotten about him. Back when we were students, he was this gloomy kid who followed me around after I beat up a mutual tormentor who'd been bullying him. After I drove that lunatic to quit school, George even gave me a gift. The boy's face was always sullen, his expression awkward, and he spouted a lot of nonsense, saying things like, "Don't get close to me or you'll become unlucky." It wasn't until much later that I realized he was trying to thank me with that moody stare. At the time, I was in a rare good mood after an episode and told him I didn't help him out of kindness. I still took the gift though, after all. I have occasional bouts of extreme aversion to people and prefer not to interact with anyone spouting such nonsensical stuff. After I went abroad, I kept getting messages from random people. I blocked most of them, but one person, who went by the name Farewell, often sent me cryptic messages. Sometimes, though, I found them funny, kind of like one of those digital pets Melissa once recommended to me. For example, "Farewell, at the auction. You looked at that heart of the ocean gem for a long time. Couldn't afford it? I bought it for you." Me? I donated that. Then I donated the gem again, just for fun. Another time. "Farewell, you looked stunning on the cover of that fashion magazine today. I bought 20,000 copies to keep." Me, I didn't authorize any images. Which magazine? I sent a legal notice to the infringing magazine the very next day. He'd also send selfies from time to time. Objectively speaking, he wasn't bad looking, but the shirtless abs shots and that seductive but not too obvious vibe were way too much. So, I blocked him. It wasn't until recently, when he revealed his identity to me, that I realized Farewell was George. Who knew? After all these years, George had gone from being a brooding guy with an overactive imagination to a complete airhead. All right. Got it. I mused. I'll hang up now. The gifts I got you are already on their way. Melissa sounded a bit pleased. Great. Then she asked, "Want me to close off the airport for you?" Her family owns the airport, so I knew what she meant. She was worried about a potential bloodbath and was offering to help cover things up in advance. Honestly, I had considered giving someone a good beating, but I've had a change of heart. No need, I replied. I'm not in the mood for violence lately. Chapter 3. The plane landed on time. George, whom I hadn't seen in years, was waiting for me with a circle of well-dressed, wealthy young men carrying flowers. By his side was a child who bore a striking resemblance to him. A quick glance revealed a pale, delicate-looking woman discreetly following them from behind. Ah, that would be George's wife, Emily. From my investigation, I discovered that George had made rapid advancements over the past few years, leading the coup group into the upper echelons of society, all thanks to marrying Emily, the eldest daughter of the elusive Sand family. The Sand family only had 2 direct heirs left, Emily and the old Sand matriarch. After the matriarch passed away, George absorbed much of the Sand family's influence. Emily was a sheltered, sickly girl raised in the comfort of her home, and she fell in love with George at first sight, marrying him soon after. To be honest, this whole love at first sight thing always seems a bit staged. The story, predictably, was the cliché hero saves damsel in distress, one of those tricks men love to pull. Emily gave up everything to become the perfect housewife for George, learning everything except how to socialize with people. Despite her near perfection as a domestic goddess, she remained invisible and undervalued, at least within the circle. Her reputation was that of a boring woman, and she was looked down on by George's friends and family. George and Elias had clearly come without Emily's knowledge. They were completely oblivious to her poor attempt at following them, despite her being right there. For the first time, I found myself a little intrigued. Changing my mind, I put on a bright smile and approached them. George had told me earlier he'd pick me up, and now he greeted me with a deep gaze, brimming with emotion. It's been a long time. His son, Elias, who seemed to have picked up on whatever habits his father had, even though it was the first time we'd met, clung to my side and sweetly called me Auntie. After a few boring pleasantries, Elias held one hand of mine and one of George's, looking up at me with a big smile. Auntie, you're so pretty. Can you be my mommy? George's friends exchanged knowing glances, nudging each other with their elbows, ready to stir up trouble. I paused for a beat, looking down at the seemingly innocent child with a sense of disgust, as though I had swallowed a fly. At that moment, Emily staggered, her expression as if her world had shattered. I snapped back to reality, pushing down the sudden urge to vomit. Humans, even those like me with unstable minds, are naturally inclined to love the person who gave them life. Elias seemed healthy and normal, with no signs of intellectual or personality disorders. These words couldn't have come from him, they must have been ingrained by his parents. Frankly, I don't enjoy watching fragile people break. The one that deserves to break is the disgusting thing standing beside me. With an unchanged smile, I bent down, my voice soft. But kiddo, I like your mom. Feigning thought for a second, I curved my lips and said quietly, how about I be your dad instead? The busy terminal suddenly went silent, as if someone had hit the mute button. George's friends, who had been joking moments earlier, were stunned. Elias's large, grape-like eyes blinked in confusion. He was too young to understand what I had said. George's expression froze for a moment. Even Emily, who seemed to be falling apart just seconds ago, now looked completely baffled, her eyes wide in disbelief. Margarita? George quickly recovered, his deep voice carrying a trace of emotion. You haven't changed, you still love to joke. I gave a half smile. I've never liked joking. George and Emily's family drama had nothing to do with me, but they shouldn't have dragged me into this disgusting mess. What did any of this have to do with me? Just because of George's pathetic affection and his garbage personality, I'm supposed to become the villain in their twisted family dynamic? While I don't mind being the bad guy, this isn't the kind of bad guy I want to be. Their fate is already set in stone, destined to fall apart. Why not just hasten the process and tear them apart myself? After speaking, I crouched down and patted Elias on the head, ready to spout some nonsense. But suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my head. My face went pale, and my fingers dug into my palm, the gloves protecting me from the pain. Something wasn't right. This was a sign that an episode was coming. I might lose control in the next few moments. George, as if sensing something, caught me just in time. His gaze softened, and he murmured affectionately, I know you're bothered by her presence, but there's no love between me and Emily. It was just a business arrangement. My heart has always belonged to you. Since I was 16, the bile rose in my throat again. He doesn't love her, yet he had no problem sleeping with her and having a child, right? Struggling, I pushed George's hand away. I was about to cause a scene when Emily, who had been hiding in the shadows, could no longer bear it and rushed out. George. It should have been a heart-wrenching cry, but it came out barely above a whisper, as if she had no strength left. Her eyes were red as she looked at George, who was only mildly surprised. She smiled bitterly through her tears. Aren't you going to explain anything to me? You followed me? George asked, his voice low, and then coldly added, Margarita is just an old friend from school. She's back in the country, and I came to pick her up. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to overthink. Elias frowned, his young voice full of reproach. Mom, how could you follow Dad? Emily's lips moved, but no words came out. Her face was ashen. Enough. This scene was too pathetic to watch. I married you out of obligation to our families. We've maintained a civil relationship for years, and I've given you enough respect. George said coldly, his voice laced with irritation. You have no right to question me. or to interfere in my affairs. As he finished speaking, he reached for my hand. I slapped it away. The throbbing pain in my temples was unbearable, and I could only manage to choke out the word, "Leave." George seemed confused, his mouth moving, but all I could hear was a loud ringing, the world around me buzzing. "This is Melissa's airport. I didn't want to cause a scene here. I needed to leave. Fast." Stopping in front of Emily, I paused to explain. "Miss San, there is nothing between George and me." My voice suddenly stopped. Stunned, I clutched my temples and looked at the pale, delicate woman in front of me. She had disappeared. The pain that had tormented me for so long seemed to dissipate the moment I approached Emily, like a gentle breeze blowing it away. The distorted and chaotic world in my vision corrected itself, and the fog clouding my mind lifted. My body felt like it was functioning properly again, and I could smell the fragrant scent of nature in the air. Everything became crystal clear. Since the onset of my illness, I had been trapped in this unbearable pain, only varying in intensity. When I went abroad, that feeling subsided, though I still considered myself a patient. But there was always a sense of loneliness. My family and friends were all here. I couldn't expect them to uproot their lives and move abroad with me. So I returned, mentally preparing to endure the pain again. Until this moment, it was as if I had undergone a miraculous healing, like bones being set and medicine instantly curing me. For the first time, I felt like a normal person. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no coincidence, that Emily had something to do with it. I looked at her differently, surprised to find no hatred in her eyes as she gazed back at me. She didn't blame me for George's behavior. It made sense. After all, in my dream, she was someone who, even at the end of her life, chose to harm herself rather than hurt others. "Hello, Emily." I removed my leather gloves, tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear, and extended my hand. "I'm Margarita Song." She froze, perhaps recalling my earlier offhand joke, and a blush crept across her pale cheeks. Though she didn't understand my intentions, she instinctively reached out to shake my hand. "Hello." The moment our fingers touched, the sensation of being healed became even more pronounced. Reluctantly, I let go, already missing the clarity that came with feeling like a normal person. Although the San family kept a low profile, they owned a number of businesses. One of their most renowned ventures was high-end custom tailoring, and their craftsmanship, especially in embroidery, was unmatched. During my research, I found that Emily had a passion for embroidery too. To find out the reason behind this strange connection and to avoid triggering an episode, I made a quick decision. In just a few seconds, I would get closer to Emily. And the best way to connect with someone is through their interests. George and I barely know each other. We went to the same school but hardly spoke. I said, "However, I've heard of Miss San's exquisite embroidery skills. I've always admired San family garments. If there's ever a chance." Emily blinked, her eyes brightening slightly. "Margarita, you don't need to bother with her," George interrupted, apparently oblivious to my words and intent. He stepped forward, acting as if no one else was present. "She's not from your world and wouldn't understand what you're talking about. You've just returned. Your home must still be in disarray. I remember you once mentioned liking the maple trees in the western suburbs. I've purchased an estate there and prepared everything for you." I frowned. How obnoxious. Though my decision to return was sudden, my family had certainly already prepared my home for me. And besides, the land in the western suburbs was developed by someone close to my family. My mother had even built a manor there as a birthday gift for me. My family always provided me with anything I liked. Why would I need anything from a married man? However, glancing at Emily, I paused for a moment. I heard Miss San recently joined a program. In my dream, Emily had taken up a role as a full-time housewife and had little contact with the outside world. To fill the void, she started her own online account, sharing bits of her daily life. During my investigation, I often liked her posts. Due to her status as Mrs. Koo, the account gained quite a following. A new variety show, The Lives of Wives, backed by Koo Group, invited her to participate. The show was a slow-paced one, where the guests invited two people to showcase their daily lives. Emily wasn't part of the social scene, but, wanting to spend time with George and Elias, She gathered the courage to accept the invitation, hoping to create a peaceful family experience on screen. Elias, being young and playful, was eager to be on television, but George refused, criticizing her for seeking attention and cutting off her financial support. In my dream, George eventually agreed to appear on the show, but things went awry. Emily was criticized for her parenting, accused of neglecting her child, and even hinted at as being unworthy of the Koo family. This only worsened her condition. The show's drama was largely driven by an opportunist trying to climb the social ladder, Margarita. Surprisingly, remembering all this now didn't anger me. Instead, I found it amusing, hilariously ironic. I'll be free for the next while. Let's keep in touch. I pulled out a business card and handed it to Emily. I look forward to your call, Miss San. It was a blatant signal. Before leaving, I ruffled Elias's hair, my tone laced with meaning. You like me, don't you, little one? I smiled. Trust me, your opinion will change. Chapter 4. As expected, Emily contacted me, perhaps out of curiosity about her husband's so-called first love, or maybe it was George's request, or perhaps, as my investigation suggested, she really had no friends. In any case, I became one of her invited guests for the show. George even messaged me, Margarita, I know you want to bond with Elias. I'm waiting for you. What a lunatic. But since I still needed to get closer to his wife and figure out why he triggered my episodes, I casually replied, don't overthink. Get help if you need it. And didn't block him. I agreed to all of Emily's conditions, except for one, we stay at my house. The idea of staying in George's house disgusted me. She agreed. I had my estate in the western suburbs cleaned and prepared. And on the day Emily moved in, she arrived not only with Elias in tow but also with a small entourage. Nervously, she explained, these are Elias's nutritionist and private tutor. I shrugged indifferently. Oh, my place is large enough. As long as it's not George moving in, I don't care who else comes. It was the season when the maple leaves turned crimson, the hills and valleys ablaze with vibrant color. As we walked through the estate, I introduced Emily to the facilities and layout. She observed everything quietly and said softly, so this is the scenery Miss Song enjoys. Emily's complexion was pale, but amidst the maple trees, a faint flush of color appeared on her cheeks. Elias seemed to love the place too. Auntie, your house is so beautiful. It's much bigger than ours. He then added in a whisper, and prettier than the house Daddy prepared for you. He said it without the slightest awareness that such words might hurt his mother. I glanced at Elias, a smile playing at my lips. Did your dad put the house in my name? Elias blinked, confused. Huh? Did he transfer the deed? Did he put my name on the property? Did he specify it as a gift? I asked slowly. If none of that happened, how exactly is that house for me? Elias stood there, stunned. He was too young to grasp these concepts. But he sensed I had a point. So, with his head down, he wandered off to think about it. Miss Song isn't quite as I imagined, Emily remarked, much calmer than I expected after hearing her son's words. What did you imagine? Well, I got a few things right. Emily smiled. George talks about you all the time. You really are as dazzling as he describes. I'm not interested in George, nor do I plan to interfere in your family. I said bluntly. We barely spoke in school, and I didn't contact him when I returned. Everything has been his own delusion. As soon as I finished, I regretted it. Ever since my illness worsened, I've grown used to saying whatever I want, forgetting how to communicate normally. Emily loves George so much that my words might offend her. Just as I was about to offer a half-hearted apology, Emily shook her head. I know, but George, he's always had feelings for you. I snorted. You call that love? The Song family is wealthy. It's only natural he'd want to climb that ladder. As a man, marriage is his most valuable tool. I said with no emotion. Isn't it the same with you, Miss San? Emily looked at me as though struck by a gong, her eyes wide in shock. I wasn't wrong. George's so-called affection was just the mask of a self-serving opportunist, concealing the filth beneath, climbing his way to the top of the Koo group. How could he not be motivated by personal gain? Emotions don't change so dramatically overnight. From what I saw in my dream, George's behavior resembled that of a leech-like man who preyed on women's inheritance. Could he really have been pining for me all these years over a fleeting high school encounter? If so, why marry Emily? Why ignore the fact that he was engaging in an emotional affair? Why did he seem so different after Emily's death? And why did he maintain his carefully crafted public image? How could he, after consolidating the assets of both the Song and Sand families, die in lonely luxury with billions to his name? Was he really suffering? More likely, he was thrilled inside. He took everything for himself and still tried to force the narrative of being a deeply devoted man. Trusting him was as absurd as believing I was Qin Shi Huang reincarnated. But I'm different, I continued, shifting my tone. The Sand family offers no advantage to mine. The Song family needs nothing from anyone. I'm interested in Miss Sand purely for who you are. Nothing more. Emily's pupils dilated, and a blush crept to her ears. She should harbor some hostility toward me. Yet she seemed like a soft pool of water, absorbing all negativity, unsure how to resent or resist. Perhaps her sheltered upbringing within the Sand family left her naive, making her so easily deceived. But something didn't add up. The Sand family, almost entirely wiped out, was held together by the old Sand matriarch's iron will. In such a matriarchal household, why hadn't the old lady groomed Emily to stand on her own? Why pin all her hopes on marrying her off to a decent man? People's thoughts usually aligned with their upbringing, yet the old matriarch's actions defied the logic she should have followed. It was as though the moment George entered the picture, the storylines of everyone's lives bent to an uncontrollable direction. Honestly, I didn't used to believe in fate or the supernatural, but the older I get, the more I feel like we're all part of some grand performance. Our emotions manipulated like puppets on strings. So many illogical things have happened, yet it seems I'm the only one who notices. When I lose control during an episode, I feel as though the entire world has gone mad, that everyone else is insane. I've never believed there was something wrong with me. So, Emily, what role do you play in all of this? Chapter 5. I placed Emily and Elias in the room next to mine. That night, after so many nightmares, I unexpectedly had a good night's sleep. I usually didn't need an alarm because of my poor sleep quality. I'd always wake up at the crack of dawn. But this time, it wasn't until the production crew knocked on my door that I finally woke up. Being in charge of some of the Song family's businesses and occasionally modeling for our fashion line, I was used to being in front of the camera. Heirs to large families are often halfway to being public figures anyway. Downstairs, breakfast was already prepared, balanced and nutritious. Clearly, it wasn't made by our housekeeper but by the team Emily had brought along. Living abroad, I had grown accustomed to simpler meals. This was the first time I'd encountered such a meticulously prepared breakfast. So I pulled out a chair and started eating without hesitation. Elias, however, looked sullen, pushing his food around on the plate with little appetite. An older servant stood nearby, hesitating. Young master, your mother got up early to make this especially for you. You shouldn't waste her efforts. But something about this upset Elias, and he shoved the plate away, raising his voice. I'm not eating it. He then walked over to me, his eyes pleading, and blurted out, Auntie, I want to eat those burgers and fries, like the ones in the pictures Daddy showed me of you. I paused. There really was a moment like this in my dream. George had shown him paparazzi photos of me eating fast food abroad. Later, I took the kid out for burgers and fries and then to the amusement park. He decided his rigid, boring mother was truly awful and that I was much better. To be fair, I do enjoy burgers, fries, ice cream, and spicy street food, but that doesn't mean I disregard healthy eating. It's not right to transfer anger to a child who hasn't fully formed their worldview. Elias is still young and far from being set in his ways. Elias. Emily stood up, looking flustered. Those things aren't healthy, I asked. Elias. Have you ever asked your mom if she's eaten those things? Elias glanced at Emily in confusion, his little nose wrinkling as if he had planned to criticize her but had now forgotten what to say. Emily shook her head at me. The cameras were trained on my face, as if hoping to capture a juicy scene of family drama. Thanks to Emily, I felt more serene than ever before, so much so that I could even look at Elias calmly. I smiled and said slowly, your mother wasn't always a mom. This is her first time being your mother. No one taught her how. She's learning as she goes. And she grew up just like you. So, she's raising you the way she was raised. She hasn't eaten those things. So she doesn't know if they taste good or not. She only knows that she hasn't tried them. The things you want to do, she probably hasn't done them either. And she doesn't know if they're fun or not. She got up early to make you breakfast. Not to feel good about herself, but because that's how she was treated as a child. And she thought you'd like it. She might just be stuck in the past. I took a sip of warm milk. You want to be a responsible adult, right? I heard that in kindergarten you taught your classmates how to fold paper. So why not give your mom a little more patience and teach her? Elias tilted his head, murmuring, Mom hasn't eaten chicken wings or burgers either? No. Mom hasn't gone to an amusement park? No. Mom makes me breakfast because her mom always made her breakfast? Emily's eyes reddened. No. It was my grandmother. She didn't know how to raise a child. When she married George, she was only 20, a girl herself, ill-prepared to take on the role of a mother, and George had no intention of teaching her. If anything, he probably wished he could blindfold her and plug her ears, trapping her in ignorance for the rest of her life. So, less than 6 months after their wedding, Emily was pregnant. That child tied her down and became the final straw that broke her spirit. To be a parent, one needs both the respect and closeness of their child. Over the years, as part of my efforts to heal my mental illness, I've read many books on psychology. Taming this child should be no problem. He's just off track, not broken. Auntie, Elias said after thinking for a while, if I take Mom to do those things, will she understand me better? I don't know, I replied. You'll have to ask her if she's willing. The most important thing when inviting someone to do something is asking if they want to. The young heir of the Koo family, who has always had everything handed to him, clearly wasn't used to the idea of asking for someone's consent. He mulled it over before obediently asking Emily, Mom, will you try those things with me? Emily shot me a look for help, but I just smiled at her. So, after a moment of hesitation, Emily bent down and said earnestly, I'm willing, Elias. Elias's eyes lit up, as if he had received some monumental promise. How are you going to take her if you've never done it yourself? I asked, slipping on my gloves. Come on, I'll take you both. And just like that, the docile Emily and Elias followed me out. I had someone buy ready-made junk food, and then we went to the kitchen to use an air fryer to make our own, comparing which tasted better. Ding! In the noisy kitchen, Emily was carefully following the recipe, trying to coat the chicken with cornstarch, while Elias sidled up to me and whispered, Auntie, how can I become like you? It seemed George had spoken highly of me to him, as Elias's trust and admiration for me were absurdly high. Why do you want to be like me? I squinted. Didn't your dad tell you? I'm mentally ill. The term mentally ill was clearly beyond Elias's comprehension. I think Auntie is really amazing. I don't understand everything you say, but it seems to make sense, he said, his young face earnest. How can I learn all those things? I froze. That same feeling, the sensation of my illness retreating, as though something inside me was being cleansed, reappeared. This time, its source was this little boy standing before me. I asked, What? Didn't your dad teach you? Dad isn't home much. Elias shook his head, and he doesn't talk to me about stuff like that. He only tells me what's right and what's wrong. In Elias's world, his entire understanding of right and wrong came from George. What's right? Mom not working and staying home to take care of him is right. What's wrong? Mom pestering his busy father is wrong. I asked, and do you think he's right? Elias hesitated for a long time before lowering his head and whispering, I don't know. I wasn't surprised. The entire Koo family had established a firm paternal authority before him, but the more Elias was exposed to the outside world, the more he would realize that what he had learned contradicted reality. He was a bright child, but under George's influence, he had decided his mother shouldn't be that way and had chosen to cast her aside in favor of a new mom who fit his ideal. That person was me. But now, I found something even more interesting to guide him toward understanding and, eventually, lead him to cast George aside, choosing a new dad instead. George didn't deserve him. Besides, I wanted to test if Elias had any connection to the suppression of my episodes. So, which chicken do you like better? I asked, holding up the plate and offering him 2 pieces. After tasting both, he unhesitatingly pointed to one. This one. That's the one your mom made. I took a bite of the crispy skin, the tender juice filling my mouth. I didn't hold back on my praise. Your mom is an excellent cook. She's smart and learns quickly. Elias seemed to acknowledge his mother's talent for the first time, nodding thoughtfully. Mom's better than me. I can't do it. So, now, what do you think about what your dad says? I asked. You're a smart kid. You'll figure it out for yourself. Just like you did with the chicken. In the afternoon, when I took him and Emily to the amusement park, I handed him a tissue and suggested he help wipe the water off Emily after the log ride. Lesson 1 in growing up. I whispered to Elias, protect your mom, because, besides you, she has no one else. If you don't believe me, look around. At home, you're the only one by her side. Elias turned to look at Emily. Her face flushed. She had obviously never been to a place like this or tried such a thrilling ride. She was trembling with fear, breathing heavily, but her eyes sparkled as she asked me, Elias, song. Margarita, should we go again? This was a version of his mom Elias had never seen before. He rushed forward to help her wipe the water from her clothes. And in that moment, the light around me brightened. It was as if someone had blown away the thin layer of dust covering my world, leaving it clean and clear. So, that's how it is. I stood up and said, you're a smart kid, Elias. I believe you can see it. You'll figure it out. So, this is how it is. When you find the answer, come back to me, and I'll teach you everything you want to know. Chapter 6. The first episode of The Lives of Wives wrapped up, and Emily and Elias returned home. I, too, went back to my parents' house, planning to spend a few days with them. That evening, however, Melissa showed up uninvited, knocking on the door with her large, reproachful eyes staring at me. You came back and didn't even call me, she said. I've been waiting for days. I glanced at the suitcase she was carrying. I was going to invite you over tomorrow. We already have your things here, so why bring more? It's a gift for you. Hearing that, Melissa's mood seemed to improve. She smiled, linking her arm with mine as we walked into the dining room, where she greeted my parents. Union's here. My mom greeted her warmly. Perfect timing. We haven't started eating yet, and all these dishes are your favorites. My parents have always misunderstood Melissa. They think she's just a slow, sweet, innocent girl, a young lady naive to the world's harshness, an angel who patiently tolerates my illness like a little saint. They have no idea that Melissa, as my closest friend, is far from normal. For instance, right now, as we sit on my bed in my room, she rests her chin on her hand and slowly fills me in on everything I've missed while being abroad. X's family business went bankrupt. They were taken down during the anti-organized crime crackdown. X was that lawless gangster who thought himself untouchable. You set him up? I know Melissa all too well. Yeah. Her expression was calm. The XX family is gone too. They were involved in feudal superstitions and running a cult. XX was that self-righteous Buddhist monk who toyed with prayer beads, attracting followers with his looks. His worshippers caused several bullying incidents, including one that led to a girl's suicide attempt. He did nothing. You did that too? Yep, I arranged for him to hold a gathering that turned into a cult incident, she said slowly. Oh, and Triple X. He got swept up in a prostitution bust. Triple X was the spoiled young heir who had once tried to woo me. That one wasn't me, Melissa said, her tone still peaceful. He got involved with a hostess. On again, off again, claimed they were dating. Then one time, he humiliated her when she upset him, called his friends over to force her into doing something. I just happened to walk by and reported them for solicitation. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. There's no shortage of unhinged people in the capital, but these 3 really stood out. Did you cover your tracks? I asked, concerned. Don't get caught up in this mess. Of course, her eyes were clear. I just remembered I hadn't told you before. But now I did. Melissa reacts slowly and has a serious case of forgetfulness. Why did you take them down? I stroked her soft hair. You should have waited for me to come back and help. You hate them, she said with a trace of disdain in her eyes. I hate them too, but it's made your memory worse, hasn't it? I said quietly. Melly, since coming back, my illness has improved, but I've also started noticing a lot of things. She frowned slightly and held my hand. Margarita, you're not sick. Melissa's hand was warm, like a soft cloud, driving away the chill that had crept into my heart as I glimpsed the unsettling truth. I never understood why I suddenly developed this illness. I continued. And you, why you suddenly started having memory problems and slowed reactions. Melissa looked puzzled, taking her time to process my words. Do you know about rejection syndrome? I pulled off my ever-present gloves. We're different from the rest of the world. We're like an infection, an anomaly the world wants to purge. We're misfit puppets, minor characters. We're people who want to be ourselves. Maybe our fates were sealed the moment we were born, but I think they're wrong, insane, twisted. I refuse to go along with their plans. So we've been rejected. My illness, your memory loss, they're just symptoms of this world's attempts to mold us into something else. Its rejection is impossible to resist. Ever since I first fell ill, I've developed hives every time I come into contact with people who make me want to vomit. It's as if my body is violently allergic to them. My resistance was too fierce, so I lost control. The pain I feel and her memory lapses are the world's punishment for us. Melly, in every story, there's a protagonist, and in this story, all the main characters are people we know. We hate them, and the more we act against them, the sicker we get. That's why I fled abroad, and that's why I slowly started to get better, until the day the real story began. Melissa stared at me, her eyes filling with tears, seemingly without realizing it. It was an involuntary, emotionless reaction, a single tear shed by the actor behind her mask of a character. But I've found a way, I said, wiping away her tears with a cold smile. The story can be rewritten. If the protagonist fails, we'll raise another one to correct the world. She seemed to understand. Emily? Melly couldn't have suddenly remembered all of this, and I couldn't have suddenly gotten better. The only variable is Emily, that blank slate of a girl, with no personality of her own, existing solely for George. We're going to help her, I said. Melly, this is how we help ourselves. We've been best friends for nearly 20 years. She never questions me, never doubts me. Maybe our fates were intertwined from the start, destined to fight side by side. Suddenly, Melissa reached out and gently hugged me, just like the first time I had an episode at school, when I resisted everyone else but clung to her hand. We've always been each other's pillars of support. Without hesitation, she said, "All right." Chapter 7. Elias and Emily were abruptly removed from the filming of The Lives of Wives. George messaged me, and this time, his tone wasn't the usual fake affection but rather a cold reprimand. Elias doesn't need a mother who talks nonsense. Margarita, I think your illness is becoming unpredictable. You said some rather troubling things on the show, and I've already contacted a well-known doctor abroad. I knew he was getting desperate. The first episode of The Lives of Wives aired, and the public reaction wasn't what he expected. Everyone says Mrs. Koo doesn't deserve Mr. Koo. But I'm not so sure anymore. And didn't Koo say his wife was shy and didn't like going out? Emily doesn't seem that introverted. Could it be she's being controlled? Honestly, her old vlogs gave me the vibe of a caged bird. The more I think about it, the creepier it gets. There's clearly an issue with the mother-son relationship. But Emily can't be the only one at fault here, right? Where's George in all of this? This family seems fine without George. But hey, Margarita, do you need a dog? I'm asking for a friend who's 20 and house-trained. Margarita's song. Isn't she the song family heiress? She's so cool and gorgeous. That glove is everything. What's George's deal anyway? Too busy to film for a single episode? Doesn't seem that busy to me, considering all the tabloid headlines. Mixed in with the jokes, there was genuine dissatisfaction. What I didn't know was that one day, when George mentioned me at home again, Emily, usually so passive, coldly retorted, "Do you really think Miss Song would be interested in you? You think a married man can lust after her? I find you disgusting." Even Elias, usually idolizing his father, stood up to him, saying in an unusually adult tone, "Dad, it's wrong to speak to Mom that way." For the first time, his submissive wife defied him, and the son he was grooming as his heir began to shift. His chosen future bride, me, showed nothing but disdain, and the internet was filled with criticism. His business, too, seemed to be facing opposition from unseen forces. Everything was going wrong. The cracks in George's composed facade began to show. He could no longer face me with his fake warmth. This time, I blocked him without hesitation. Yet something still felt off. Emily hadn't reached out in 3 days. When I sent her messages, she responded politely but distantly. When I asked why she had withdrawn from the show, she cited health reasons and said she couldn't meet with me for the time being. I was planning to visit the Koo family when an unexpected guest arrived at my door. It was pouring rain that night, and a drenched Elias stood alone at my doorstep, shivering. His clothes were stained with blood. He must have fallen, as his knee was scraped and his face bruised. He was trembling from the cold. The moment he saw me, tears welled up in his eyes, and he choked out, "Auntie, please save Mom." After getting him inside, giving him a hot bath, and preparing ginger tea, I asked him to tell me what had happened. His small hands were tightly clenched, and his mood was somber. "After we got home, you told me to see who would stand by Mom's side. So I did." The answer was clear. In his father's world, there was no room for Emily's voice. Then after the show aired, Dad got really mad. He locked Mom up. "I can't see her." I begged him and the housekeepers to let her out. But no one listened to me. He hadn't heard his mother's voice or seen her face for days. She was locked away in a room, and even her phone messages were being sent by George. When Elias made a scene at home, George sent him to boarding school, forbidding him from leaving campus. Elias had managed to sneak out during lunch, scaling the school's walls. The Koo family was vast, but he couldn't find anyone willing to help him until he remembered me. "I understand," I said, my tone darkening. "I'll go save your mom right now." With the Sand family fully absorbed into the Koo family, Emily had no living relatives, and George, her legal husband, could easily control her freedom. But this was nothing short of illegal imprisonment. Not wanting to alert George, I called Elias's school to excuse him for the day, instructing him to stay at my house and not go out. Just as I was leaving, he stopped me. "Miss Song." "The question you asked me last time." "I think I know the answer," Elias said. "I didn't ask Dad. I asked my teacher. I think I've done a lot of things wrong. I've made Mom sad a lot." "Did your teacher tell you that it's never too late to make things right?" I asked. "Yes. She taught me that and many other things." His voice quivered with emotion. "Dad locking up Mom and keeping her from the show is wrong. He has no right." "Then, Elias, you've developed your own sense of right and wrong." I knelt down and patted his head. "That's really impressive. Miss Song, why do you always call me by my full name?" "Because, to me, you're someone who will grow up to be a strong adult. You've done really well this time. Remember? The first lesson in growing up, protect your mom. And this time, you've tried to protect her." Chapter 8. I hadn't expected George to be so bold, imprisoning Emily like that. He truly was a man consumed by arrogance. Unlike him, I follow the law. I couldn't just barge into the Koo residence. I needed a plan. Melissa, ever timely, sent me a crucial update. "Margarita, George took Emily to see a psychiatrist abroad." She hesitated. "If the diagnosis comes through." I paused, then let out a cold laugh. He must have gotten the idea from me. Of course, Emily wasn't mentally ill. George just wanted her to be. Forging a mental illness diagnosis is easy enough once the report is made public. With no one left from the Sand family to intervene, George would be Emily's sole guardian. He'd control her every move and strip her of all her basic rights as a normal person. He might even gain public sympathy by appearing as the devoted husband who didn't abandon his mentally ill wife. At that point, I wouldn't be able to see Emily anymore, let alone help her. What a parasite, I muttered with disdain. "Margarita, what should we do now?" Melissa asked, worry creeping into her voice. "Should we have my family confront the Koo family directly?" The Move family has already put enough pressure on George in the business world. I replied after a moment's thought. What we need to do now is search. Search for what? I refuse to believe the old Sand matriarch didn't leave something behind for Emily. Even if the world's forces were controlling her, she likely had moments of clarity. Like us. Melissa was silent for a few seconds. I get it. I'll start digging into the old Sand group records and their original teams. If the old matriarch left anything for Emily, where would it be? After thinking for a while, I said, I need to check the cemetery where the old lady is buried. Got it. The rain continued to pour down, shrouding the sky in mist. I knew the cemetery where the Sand matriarch was buried, but I wasn't sure of the exact spot. So I started searching row by row. Halfway through, I encountered a middle-aged woman cleaning the grounds. Hey, she called out. Clearly the caretaker. Who are you looking for? Laura Sand. The name seemed to strike a chord with her. She froze, scrutinizing me for a long time before asking, what's your connection to her? What's your name? And why are you looking for her now, when it's not even Qingming Festival? I'm a friend of her granddaughter, though I shouldn't have revealed so much. Something compelled me to hand her my ID. My name is Margarita Song, and I'm here to. What excuse should I give? After a brief pause, I simply said, I'm here to help Emily. It was a vague answer, but the woman fell silent. She pulled out a piece of paper from her pocket, put down her broom, and slipped on a pair of glasses, studying the document as if verifying something. I caught a glimpse of the paper. The first name on the list was George's, followed by the Koo family's direct members. I said nothing, allowing her the time she needed. After what seemed like an eternity, she let out a sigh of relief. As I thought, there's nothing to worry about. My memory isn't that bad after all. With that, she turned and said, come with me. She led me to a small office in the cemetery's main building. From one of the many drawers, she pulled out a small safe and handed it to me. This is what you're looking for, she said with a long exhale. I've been waiting years to pass it on, holding the lightweight safe. I couldn't help but ask, did the old matriarch ask you to guard this? Indeed, she was an odd one, buying her own plot in advance. The woman mused, lost in thought. But she was also the most formidable person I've ever met. I owed her a debt, so I agreed to keep this hidden from everyone. The paper she gave me lists all the names I should ignore. I had seen the last name on the list, Laura. She had even planned to outwit herself. And if Emily had come? If she came alone, I would have given it to her. But every year, she's always had someone with her. Was it a companion, or a watchman? The thought made my blood run cold. I glanced down at the safe. I understand. I don't know the combination, she added. Only the person meant to open it can take it. Nodding, I entered a string of numbers without hesitation. When did the Sand matriarch first realize something was wrong? Emily's parents had died under suspicious circumstances. If I was right, that tragedy was the punishment. For the matriarch, no physical pain could compare to the agony of losing her own bloodline. The code I entered was the date of their deaths. Click. The safe opened. So, you could open it after all. I guess I didn't wait in vain. The caretaker's eyes lit up. The old lady also left some money with me, but I'll only give it directly to Emily. I shook my head as I looked inside the open safe. That won't be necessary. There wasn't much inside, just a thick stack of documents, a letter, and a small note. The note had only one line, written in sharp, elegant handwriting. For all your help, words are not enough. The money is for you. Don't linger. The future is bright. Best wishes. There was no signature, but I knew who it was meant for. I handed it to the caretaker, closed the safe, and turned to leave. She stood there in shock, a choked sob escaping her throat. But by then, I was already gone, no longer able to see the tears streaming down her face. Chapter 9. At the Koo family residence. Margarita. I didn't expect you to come to me directly, George said, pouring me a drink with his usual faux tenderness. I knew you had feelings for me. Melissa, sitting beside me, let out a soft snicker. I didn't even look at him. Instead, my eyes were locked on the second floor. Where's Miss Sand? She's unwell, George replied without a change in his expression. And not up for visitors. No need to put on a show. I said with a half smile. I'm here to get you to release her. George narrowed his eyes slightly. I felt a sharp, familiar pain at the back of my mind. With a resounding smack, I threw a stack of papers onto the table. These are the documents proving your illegal acquisition of several small businesses. Another stack landed on the table. These are your company's financial records, showing extensive tax evasion. Yet another stack followed. This is proof that Emily is a shareholder of Hongan Group. And then another. This is the missing agreement for the Sand family merger. Without this, Emily remains the rightful head of the Sand family. The final stack hit the table with a thud. And this is Emily's lifelong health record. Officially certified, mentally stable, no history of illness. Your fabricated mental illness diagnosis looks ridiculous next to this. Did you think the annual family doctor wouldn't upload all this data? Melissa calmly pushed a USB drive across the table. And here is the evidence of you hiring someone to kidnap Emily. Photos, recordings, bank transfers, it's all here. George's face turned darker with each piece of evidence I laid out. His anger building with each one. He glared at everything on the table, shouting, "How did you get this stuff? It's all fake. Fabricated. You know very well what's real and what isn't," I said, tapping the table, ignoring the increasing pain in my head. "And you should be able to guess who prepared all of this for you. Haven't you been searching for years?" His expression changed, but then, as if regaining control, he let out a small, cold laugh. "So what? My company is Emily's company too. She'll take the blame for me if needed. Do you really want to see her in jail? These things from our past, though not pretty, mean nothing now. We're happy. As long as Emily doesn't care, the police won't intervene in family matters. She loves me more than you realize." He waved his hand. "Let her out." The door opened. Emily descended the stairs, dressed in a white gown. She looked at me and Melissa, her once lifeless eyes flickering briefly before returning to a hollow stillness. "George?" she called softly. "Emily, all our misunderstandings have been cleared up these past few days," George said, wrapping an arm around her waist and leaning close to whisper in her ear. "Forget these crazy people. From now on, it's just the three of us. Let's live a happy life. And maybe you can give me a little princess." Emily's mind seemed clouded, but she gazed at George with a dazed, yet strangely happy smile. "They've gone mad. 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 I'm not mad. I'm not mad. They're the ones who are mad. Not me. They're the ones who are mad. Not me." The world tilted, and a wave of nausea overtook me, threatening to drown me in the madness. My vision blurred with a wash of red as I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block out the chaotic noise swirling around me until something soft covered my hands. "Margarita, you're not mad." It was Melissa's voice. "I'll stay with you through this." She let go of my hands and reached into my pocket, pulling out a letter and tearing it open. "To my granddaughter Emily. I hope this letter finds you well. By the time you read this, I will have been gone for some time. What season is it where you are now? If it's winter, remember how much you hate the cold. You used to dress so prettily. But Emily, to me, you will always be my cutest little snowball, even when bundled up. I hope you never have to open this letter. But if you are reading it, then you must be facing some of the difficulties I feared for you. Perhaps you were feeling lonely, and came to see me. I miss you too." The pain began to ease. I looked up and saw a spark of life returning to Emily's eyes as she stared at the letter in Melissa's hands. George's face darkened as he lunged for the letter. "What nonsense is this?" I stepped forward and slapped him hard across the face, following up with a few quick strikes, knocking him out cold to keep him out of the way. All those years of martial arts training weren't for nothing. If I hadn't learned how to fight, I would have been beaten black and blue countless times. Melissa didn't seem to notice the commotion, continuing to read the letter aloud. Maybe it's because I'm old and near the end of my life that I've finally had some moments of clarity. "Emily, did you know that for many years, I've been trying to atone for my sins? Over the years, I've felt like I've been living in a fog. When you were little, I didn't teach you how to protect yourself. As you grew, I didn't teach you how to be strong or how to choose your own path. By the time you were old enough, I rushed to prepare you to take over the company, and I was punished. I believe it was punishment. Emily, there seemed to be some strange force that wanted to keep you innocent and ignorant, trapped in the role of the perfect wife and mother. It felt like I was a puppet, and the more I tried to resist, the less freedom I had. I often forgot what I was supposed to do. I believe it was a punishment. Your parents' deaths occurred the day after I took you into the company. Every day since, I've lived with regret and fear. I killed my daughter and son-in-law. Would I also destroy you? But I wanted to ask, why? Why my Emily? When you brought George to see me, I was horrified to realize he might be the one destined to enter your life. But he wasn't a good man. I wanted to drive him away, to protect you, but in that moment, I lost myself again. I gave you to him. I even remember telling him to take over the company. I was a shell of my former self. I wouldn't have trusted an outsider with our family's legacy. The company belongs to you, Emily. If you don't want to manage it, find an agent. But you never need to rely on anyone. I've earned enough money for you to live happily for the rest of your life. I failed again. At least I'm dying soon. In these final moments of clarity, I look into your eyes, and I see that George treats you well. But is it because our family is still useful to him? I know you love George, but I fear that love is not your own. I am powerless now, but I've left you everything you need to break free. George is deceiving you, but I hope he deceives you forever. But if there comes a day when he no longer bothers to deceive you, if you feel trapped, and if you find friends willing to help you, then you will come to see me. I can no longer take care of you. But, Emily, I hope you will become the person you want to be. In my life. Melissa skipped parts of the letter, her lashes fluttering as if she were too affected by the words to continue. She closed the letter, leaving the rest unread. Among the thick stack of papers in the letter were photographs, some stained with traces of blood, as if they had been written in the matriarch's final days. Drip. It was Emily's tears. She clutched the letter to her chest, covering her mouth, her body shaking as she cried silently. Crack. At that moment, I heard a faint, but clear sound of something breaking, like glass shattering, in my mind. The world before me brightened, as if an invisible force that had been holding George together was now gone. I turned to Melissa and saw that she, too, looked dazed. This letter has a strange power, Melissa said. It feels warm. I feel like I've become. She trailed off, as if struggling to describe it. But I knew. This letter contained the same defiant spirit that Laura San, another scar on the fabric of this world, had possessed. We did it, I said, turning to Melissa. The plot has changed. Chapter 10. With years of accumulated evidence of his crimes, George was sentenced to prison. On the day of the trial, Emily, as the plaintiff, wore a sharp, well-tailored suit. She presented the lawsuit and evidence with calm precision. Melissa and I sat in the audience, next to Elias, who was also dressed in a suit. In a soft voice, he said to us, "Mom looks so cool." Melissa whispered back to me, "Does this mean he can't be a civil servant in the future?" Elias, overhearing, sat up straight and earnestly replied, "I made Mom sad before, and I had to be punished. Dad did bad things, so he should be punished too." But after he spoke, his expression grew conflicted. I asked, "What's wrong?" He puffed out his cheeks, thinking hard. "Dad is still my dad. But if I don't want him as my dad anymore, does that make me wrong?" "You only need to reason with people who are reasonable," Melissa replied, as serious as ever. "George doesn't exactly count as a person, so no need." I couldn't help but laugh again. Even in such a solemn setting, can I really not want him anymore? Elias blinked, looking a bit down. "He did too many bad things, and he didn't want me first. You'll have to ask your mom about that," I said, drawing out my words. Lesson number 2, when you don't know how to decide something, ask your mom. He nodded obediently. Recently, Emily had been taking over the family business, which kept her extremely busy. Fortunately, Melissa and I were there to help. Emily didn't take our help for granted, though. Not only did she share some company shares with us, but she also gave us 2 beautiful embroidered pieces as gifts. She had only recently picked up embroidery again, Yet she'd already made connections with several renowned masters in the craft. Her work was gaining a bit of fame, though I couldn't tell if the stitches were particularly remarkable. My mom's eyes lit up when she saw the pieces. She hung them in the living room, proudly declaring them future masterpieces that would increase in value. Later, Elias ran off to ask his mom about the whole dad situation. Whatever they talked about, he suddenly turned to look at me and Melissa, his cherubic face lighting up with joy. After court, we all headed to Emily's new home. Today, the housekeeper had the day off, so Emily was in charge of dinner. Elias was squatting beside the counter, carefully washing vegetables. I finished washing the fruit and beckoned him over with a curl of my finger. He came running. "What did your mom say?" "Mom said she's planning to invest in her own TV show. Each group will have 4 guests, and she said we could be the 4 of us." He grinned mischievously. "Melissa, munching on pineapple," said Elias. "That's not the answer we were asking for. We want to know, did your mom answer the other question?" "She did," he replied, his eyes sparkling. "Mom said it's okay if we don't have a dad." Then, with a sly smile, he added, "Because now, I have 3 moms." We froze. "I don't mind being your godmother, but if you call me mom, I'll knock you out," I warned, half jokingly. I don't plan on having kids. "So, sure, I'll be your mom too," Melissa added, grinning. The sky was gray and overcast as we left the courthouse, but we walked quickly, against the flow of people, and out from beneath the dark clouds. Finally, we emerged onto a sunlit path, bright and clear,